Aspects of populism could be found in the communist and fascist movements, particularly during their oppositional phases. But both of those ideologies, and the regimes that embraced them, were essentially elitist, placing a small group of powerful insiders above the masses. In the first decades of the post-war era, Western European politics was defined by a broad consensus on three key issues: alignment with the United States in the Cold War, the need for more political integration on the continent, and the benefits of maintaining a strong welfare state. Deep and wide support for those positions left little space for ideological alternatives, and populism was no exception. It wasn't until the 1980s that populist thinking truly began to make its mark, with the arrival of radical right-wing parties, such as France's National Front, which rose to prominence in the wake of mass immigration and growing unemployment by promising to return France to the monocultural glory of its past. Today, populist parties are represented in the parliaments of most European countries. The majority are right-wing, although not all are radical. Others are left-wing or espouse idiosyncratic platforms that are difficult to place on a left-right spectrum. For example, the Italian Five-Star Movement, which has found success with a combination of environmentalism, anti-corruption rectitude, and anti-establishment rage. In national elections held in the past 5 years, at least one populist party earned 10% or more of the vote in 16 European countries. Collectively, populist parties scored an average of 16.5% of the vote in those elections, ranging from a staggering 65% in Hungary to less than 1% in Luxembourg. Populists now control the largest share of parliamentary seats in 6 countries: Greece, Hungary, Italy, Poland, Slovakia, and Switzerland. In 3 of those, Hungary, Italy, and Slovakia, populist parties collectively gained a majority of the votes in the most recent national elections, although in Hungary and Italy the main populist parties are rivals. The situation in Hungary is most striking, where the governing party, Fidesz, and the largest opposition party, Jobbik, are both populist. Finally, in 3 other countries, Finland, Lithuania, and Norway, populist parties are now part of the governing coalitions. Tina politics. Most conventional explanations of this trend emphasize the importance of 2 factors: globalization and the economic crises in Europe that resulted from the financial meltdown of 2008 and the subsequent Great Recession. But the current populist movement is part of a longer story and is rooted in the post-industrial revolution that led to fundamental changes in European societies in the 1960s. During those years, deindustrialization and a steep decline in religious observance weakened the support enjoyed by established center-left and center-right parties, which had been largely dependent on working-class and religious voters. In the quarter-century that followed, a gradual realignment in European politics saw voters throw their support to old parties that had become virtually non-ideological, or to new parties defined by relatively narrow ideological stances. Later, during the last 2 decades of the 20th century, mainstream European parties increasingly converged on a new elite consensus, a common agenda that called for integration through the EU, multi-ethnic societies, and neoliberal economic reforms. The embrace of a vision of Europe as a cosmopolitan, business-friendly technocracy was particularly pronounced among parties that had traditionally been social democratic, many of which were inspired by British Prime Minister Tony Blair's concept of a new Labour Party and German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder's move toward a new center, New Mitte. The traditional center-right parties also shifted away from their historical identities, as leaders such as Merkel and David Cameron of the British Conservative Party adopted more centrist and pragmatic approaches to economic and cultural issues. This convergence created a fertile breeding ground for populism, as many voters began to see political elites as indistinguishable from